What's up, everybody? Welcome into Tom Curran's Patriots Talk podcast. Back from the Combine, it's Phil Perry. We got a half an hour or so of intel on what Phil picked up and the direction of the Patriots as free agency approaches. Strap in. We're going to have ourselves a time. Phil, I'm looking at some of the Patriots' moves in the direction of the team, the roster, the coaching staff, and there's so much around this team right now that makes me feel as if it's still renovating. It's still tweaking between the coaching upheaval and the ushering in and the hoping for new leaders to emerge. This is rebuildy as it could get, but it's different in a way from the rebuild of 2021. What's your perception right now of what the Patriots are up to on the cusp of free agency?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I also think that's just sort of how the rest of the league lives, and maybe we're just sort of experiencing it firsthand for the first time in a long time. This is how every team deals with life. There are many questions. There are players retiring in, out. You know, having Tom Brady and Bill Belichick there every single year you knew what you were getting every single year. And it's not the case anymore, even though they have a young quarterback that I think a lot of us believe has shown real promise and has the ability to be a really good player. And that a lot of us believe that Bill Belichick's still a really good coach. But when all those other pieces are moving around those guys, there's uncertainty, and that's natural. And so I would say there is plenty of that surrounding the team right now. And for me, it really does. It starts on the coaching staff, because I think it's that important. And because I think the players that may be out, while important, I don't know if they're going to lose players, Tom, that are going to necessarily make them like 4 to 5 games worse. Right. You know what I mean? I don't think we're going to see any kind of cratering, but it's just, can they maintain what they started last year and build upon it? Because that's what people are expecting.
And, you know, you mentioned Brady and Belichick, and obviously those are constants. And it is a fact of life around the NFL. They're all trying to find the staples, but the Patriots are saying goodbye to staples, I think, both on the coaching staff and of their own volition on the team. Chung, his own decision, but perhaps Devin McCourty, certainly J.C. Jackson, Stephon Gilmore. Hightower, I would believe, is more likely than not to be going. Collins came back, he's gone. And we could go on to the offensive side of the ball, but my list has now stopped at Kyle Van Noy, who his release was not really a surprise to him. He's a player who I've, got a professional friendship with, and I've stayed in touch with. And he said, I don't like the way things are feeling. I got a bad feeling. This was a couple of weeks ago. And I said, why? I mean, you played 75% of the snaps. A lot of the games, I thought that Kyle Van Noy was their best defender. Certainly between he and Jawan Bentley, those were their two best linebackers. I look at Judon as more of an edge guy, as opposed to what I consider a second level player. So I thought that Van Noy was a productive guy. He played 75% of the snaps. He was a good pass rusher, better than good, I think, at occasions. He was a playmaker, and he also brought some attitude, more attitude than most guys, in leadership. But he's out. So the surprise to me isn't because of the cap savings, which is only $5 million, Phil. You can find $5 million anywhere. The production that you're saying goodbye to for the savings of $5 million is significant. So does this hint at a bigger move to you? And answer that first quickly, and then I'll move on to the next question regarding that.
Not necessarily. I would just say they are in such a spot with their cap right now that you're right. They could clear money in any number of ways, but there are only a handful that would clear that much with just one move, right? So you could release Van Noy, saves it. It's not even quite $5 million, Tom, because if you're going to replace him with even if it's an undrafted rookie, like it's going to be just over $4 million in savings. You could save $4 million with Nelson Aguilar. You could save over $3 million with Jake Bailey, which we talked about on television. I don't know if we've talked about it yet on the podcast, but I really do think that's a possibility. He's being paid as one of the highest, one of the most expensive punters in the league right now. So I think they've got to maybe even try to extend him if they like him, but there's not that many moves that free up that much space. And when you have a glut of young players at the same position, and you're looking at them and saying, well, those guys are on the roster for the next few years here. It's time to, it's time to sink or swim. And we're in a tough spot in terms of being able to really operate at all this offseason with the amount of cap space that we have. So it's a bookkeeping measure. It's a measure to get younger. It's a measure to give these guys an opportunity, but you are in the process, as you mentioned, you're getting rid of one of your best front seven players. He certainly was that last season.
Your point then leads us perfectly into the next conversation, which is forcing the hand of leadership, forcing the hand of these young players by saying, look, we just said goodbye to Kyle Van Noy. He was good. He was a second-round pick last decade. We picked him up. He won Super Bowls here. He got what we were trying to do, and he delivered for us. Now it's your turn, Ronnie Perkins, Cam McGrone, Josh Uche. And it's interesting because in hindsight, the conversation I had with Gerard Mayo at the Super Bowl about leadership kind of rolls into this. Here's some of Gerard Mayo's comments about younger players and leadership gleaned from just a couple of weeks ago at the Super Bowl.
But when you look at a locker room, there's also a generational shift happening, right? The same generational shift that happened when Hightower was coming in with me or myself coming in with Brew, right? So these are different guys that we're dealing with, and these guys are still trying to learn how to really be professionals. Even guys that are young guys that have come from other teams, like you just got to make sure these guys are in the right frame of mind. That doesn't mean giving a rah-rah speech. That's not what I'm talking about. What I mean is just making sure they're solid on the game plan. They're solid on the tools that we want to use on the field, and they're out there playing fast. And so that's what I mean when I get guys ready. I'm not talking about a pump-up speech or anything like that. Like, really, you don't need that. But you need to have these guys be able to go out there and play fast and not be paralyzed through analysis because we watch so much film. Go out there and use your natural athleticism and play ball.
So I think it's really interesting. In the same way in 2008, the Patriots forced the leadership hand, said goodbye to Seymour with a deal, said goodbye to Rodney Harrison, who was retiring. Teddy Bruschi retired of his own volition. Mike Vrabel was traded. Those are good players. Two of them are Hall of Fame players. One is definitely Rodney Harrison's on the cusp. Teddy Bruschi and Mike Vrabel are Patriots Hall of Famers. Those are staples. Same way Hightower will be, and Devin McCourty will be. I haven't said goodbye to him, and if J.C. Jackson leaves and they say goodbye to him to McCourty as well, that would make my eyes pop. But Phil, they're really forcing the hand of guys like Perkins, McGrone, Winovich, Bentley, and Uche. I hate to say they're courting disaster because that's so pessimistic. It's not like these guys are going to walk around out there with their helmets on backwards, but they're pushing it.
Yeah, I think like anything else, you don't really know who can lead until you give them the opportunity to do it. I've talked to guys before that have said, exactly that. And it was part of, I remember a while ago talking to Devin McCourty about this. And, he brought up injuries to Mayo and to Vince Wilfork and the defensive side having really nobody to turn to. And he wasn't thought of as that voice that he is now. He's the guy that rallies them before every game. And he's giving these impassioned speeches before every game, every week. He wasn't that guy. I remember writing about it before the Super Bowl against the Eagles. It was really, to me, it was really that year and maybe the year before where he kind of started to embrace that role because these other guys had just been there ahead of him. And once he got it, he took it and he ran with it. So I think that's what you're hoping for if you're Bill Belichick. And that's what these players are hoping for too. Mayo's talked about it, like you said, on the podcast. Remember Slater talking about this over the summer, talking about, it's time for the next generation to kind of take the torch here because Slater, McCourty, Van Noy, Hightower, these guys aren't going to be there forever. So it has to fall on somebody's shoulders. It's just a question of who actually does it now, right? Mac Jones is an obvious choice. I think they love Damian Harris in the building in there. I think they see him as a leader. I think he'll be a captain sooner rather than later. David Andrews is still around. So they'll have guys who can lead. It'll just be a different group, and it'll be a group that doesn't have near the number of experiences and championship experiences that the current one does.
It's funny when you look at, for instance, McCourty was a rookie, second team All-Pro. Was he rookie of the year, defensive rookie of the year?
I don't believe so, but he was
close.
Pro Bowl and All-Pro. Yeah.
Yeah.
As a
cornerback. And then his second year in the league, he really kind of played not great. And I remember after a game in Buffalo when McCourty had 2 picks in a shootout, Bill Belichick said, look, I'll ride with Devin McCourty anytime. This was in his second year. And that was audio the Patriots put out. It's been, basically he's been in for a lot of criticism, but I'll bet on Devin McCourty every time, basically. He eventually moved to safety and became a leader, but Belichick pointed at him and said, you're going to be a leader. Dante Hightower, remember, drafted in 2012, his first game, him and Chandler Jones combined on a touchdown against Tennessee. By 2013, he was getting harpooned as a disappointment, especially for some mistakes in coverage. By the end of that year, he was a one-man wrecking crew in the playoffs. And by 2014, he was ascending. And he was a very, very good player through to 2017 on a regular basis. Well, actually, he got hurt in 2017, but 2018, he was still a wrecking ball, and into 2019. But he has declined significantly, especially coming back from his opt-out year, and he was not good in 2021, plainly.
I'll push back a little bit. I thought he was pretty good against the run. He kind of is who he is. Like there are games where he is just running over people, not even making the tackle, but blowing up the play. He still has the ability to do that on occasion, but
he does. He does.
To play in coverage is not the same guy.
I look at plays, give you 3. One, the Devin Singletary bounce off it in the early push to that game, which is just left a scar. For me, the second meeting against the Buffalo Bills, and secondarily when he's in the hole against Jonathan Taylor and gets undressed on a 67-yard touchdown. Those are plays that I'm looking at. I'm like, he just doesn't arrive as soon. And when he does, as a result of not arriving as soon, that split second later, he's not in position. And I think he became more of a guesser this year. But yeah, you're right. I mean, there's plenty of times you'd say, and I did throughout the season, I feel better seeing Dante Hightower on the field. Even if he's making mistakes, even if he's not the Dante Hightower he was, I still feel good seeing Dante Hightower on the field. But I don't know if we will in 2022. Be that as it may. There are going to be guys who are foisted into these positions and roles. Can Ronnie Perkins and Josh Uche? We don't know anything about them the way we did about McCourty and Hightower when they had those leadership roles foisted on them. Who do we know anything about on the Patriots defense that can accept these leadership mantles? Duggar?
I wouldn't say we know that. I mean, I think he's
but
a
I mean,
good
we
player.
know he's a good player.
Leader? Right. I think you look at Judon as somebody who is really, because he's so good and because he's such a big personality. If people love the way things went behind the scenes in the building, and it seems like guys like McCourty really like him, that's somebody who could maybe be a leader for you the next several years. Jonathan Jones, I think we forget about him a little bit because he got hurt. He's still a good player, and he's somebody that's really highly respected in that locker room. Devin McCourty, I think, we've talked about it many times, but I think it's critical that they bring him back. So, I think they will end up having players at every level that you could look at and say, I know what I'm getting out of that guy. That guy's a good player. He's going to help. Adrian Phillips. I think he is maybe their most underrated player.
Forget about
so tough. And he just does every ounce of dirty work that they would ask him to. So, I think they are going to have those character guys, those lead by example types. It's just going to be, again, it's going to be a different crowd, and it's going to be a crowd of guys, really, unless McCourty and Hightower come back on the defensive side, at least, that won't have that championship level experience. And so they'll have to try to forge their own.
On the other side of the ball, Karen Garegian got in touch with James White, who is coming back from a hip injury. James White's going to play again. And James White felt Off the top of your head, do you know how old he is?
James White was drafted in 2014.
Oh, you're doing the math. This is not off the top of your head.
He's probably, is he 30?
Yeah, he's 30.
Yeah.
Feels older. Coming off a hip injury. Look, that's a position the Patriots, as much as Brandon Bolden was above and beyond, James White's a different style player than Brandon Bolden. A pass catcher, a mismatch creator, and Brandon Bolden was outstanding, but doesn't do it at the same level that James White does. James White still wants to play. James White's a tremendous leader. Should the Patriots make sure that James White has a home here in New England if he wants it?
I would, just because I feel like that's not going to cost you hardly anything. And you have two young running backs that are going to take the majority of the workload in Damian Harris and Ramondre Stevenson. And unless you really feel like he's just not physically where he needs to be able to contribute, because he's not going to be a special teams guy, Tom, in all likelihood. You know, guys like Falk, when they used to play that role, like they would have a punt return role or a kick return role. And that's really not James White's game. So he's going to have to physically show that he can contribute, but everything he would bring behind the scenes to me would be worthy of the kind of deal he's going to command, which isn't a huge one. But remember, he was still last year, before his injury, he was on just a 1-year contract. So it's not like the Patriots bent over backwards. Yeah. They didn't bend over backwards to make sure that he stuck around. So that's an interesting one to monitor.
Yeah. And Brandon Bolden, again, he'll play your special teams for you too. And JJ Taylor, if we're continuing to talk about these guys, you want to keep moving up the pipeline and say, look, he might not be better than James White today, but who's going to be better in 2 years? You might have to consider that. Let's transition now. As I mentioned, Phil back from Indy, and he did a tremendous notes column because, well, if we're going to send him to Indy, he better be flapping his gums all hours of the day and into the early morning hours with people around the NFL to find out what they think about the New England Patriots. Whether or not they know more than Phil, I don't think they do, but at least it's good to gain that outside intel. And Phil did get some time with Charlie Weis to address what I think is one of the ongoing intrigues around the Patriots. Look, somebody's going to decide what plays are run. Somebody's going to have to be the play caller. We don't need to know who it is right now. But the direction the Patriots will go in is important. So what's a play caller do? And could Bill Belichick do it? Phil spoke to Charlie Weis about that, and I think that Charlie was real good on this topic. It's the audio.
I mean, my first time calling plays was at my first year with the Jets, when I left with Parcells to go out to the Jets. And everyone thought Ron Earhart was calling the plays when I was calling the plays, because, you know, Parcells kind of wanted to buffer you some in case it didn't work out so well. But you never really know how a play caller is going to work out until after they have to do it, because you have to think fast now. You have to react fast. You have to think fast. It's a different world when you're the play caller. Designing them is one thing, but calling them play after play, that's something totally different.
How long did it take you to kind of get into that flow where you felt comfortable with it?
Well, we did well the first game. So the first game was, fortunate for me, was a very productive game in the first game.
So, but it's something that you can have a natural instinct to be able to execute right away.
That's right. I think that play callers can be developed to a certain level, but, you know, just like anything else, either you can do it or you really can't do it.
All right, Phil. So you get Charlie Weis. I hit up my guy, Mike Shanahan, developed a tremendous friendship with Mike Shanahan after year after year after year of me and Dan Graziano finding Mike Shanahan at the owners' meetings and just ripping Coors Lights with him. Mike Shanahan said, look, Bill could do it, but you have to invest an immense amount of time and be in all those meetings because, and I use this, Mike Shanahan didn't say it, but he made it sound like you have to have a rhythm. It's almost like being in a jazz band. Phil, lead singer for Mr. Fred, he understands how that is.
Wow.
You're on stage, you're trying to make decisions in the moment, and you can't be thinking too much. So we probably should rule out Bill Belichick as the play caller, even though he could do it. Jeremy Fowler from ESPN mentioned him as being involved. We've talked about that prior to Jeremy speaking about that. He's going to have a bigger role on the offense. Yes?
No doubt. I think just to give the offensive personnel player-wise, some credibility,
Yeah.
right? I mean, if you're Mac Jones
It
and
matters.
you've worked with Steve Sarkisian and you've worked with Bill O'Brien and you've worked with Josh McDaniels and Nick Saban and Bill Belichick,
It's such
and
a good
now
point.
you're thrust into a meeting with potentially, again, right? We still don't have 100% clarity on how this thing is going to work out, but it does seem like Joe Judge will be working with the quarterbacks. Nick Caley will be, an important resource, though to what degree we don't know yet. And Matt Patricia is going to be working on that side of the ball, it seems. So even if no matter who it is of those three, I mean, would you not look at that group and say, you almost trust Mac Jones to kind of run that meeting or call those plays?
Belichick said to me once, one of the greatest pressures of dealing with Tom Brady, and this was later on in the 2010, 11, 12 period of Brady's career, one of the greatest pressures of coaching Tom Brady was teaching him something new, going into the meetings and making sure that Brady was learning something. You're not just sitting there and telling him something that he's already knows. So you have to bring something as a coach that Mac Jones doesn't know. You should be able to do that because he's only in his second year. But again, we have a guy who was helping, again, with terminology, I think more than anything, but helping Bill O'Brien understand some of the terminology and concepts when he was taking over the Alabama offensive coordinator position. What is Nick Caley going to bring that Mac doesn't know? What will Joe Judge and Matt Patricia bring that Mac doesn't know? Authentically.
Right.
Authentically, in the case of both of those guys.
Yeah, and I shouldn't have really said that he worked with Bill O'Brien. He didn't really work with Bill O'Brien. You're right.
But that's fair.
Brief, but Brian Daboll, that's a guy that was.
But worked with. There's an exchange of ideas when you're sitting in those rooms that's going to exist, even as you're bringing, hey, this is how they name that. But it's going to be very interesting to see how that works. And
he could do it. You're right, Tom. Bill Belichick could do it. I remember talking to Dante Scarnecchia about this. He could do it. I'm sure he could do it. But he's got a lot going on. He does. I think one of the great values in having Bill Belichick as your head coach is he is a true head coach. His nose isn't stuck in the play sheet for 60 minutes on the sidelines where he doesn't know what's going on the defensive side. Now, I remember watching him the very end of 2019.
This was a great story.
In writing about his how he did things. And I didn't even really watch the game from the press box. I just watched Bill Belichick. And there were times where, because he was so involved defensively, because that was the first year of Steve Belichick and Gerard Mayo really taking the reins defensively, he was so involved there. And because Josh McDaniels was there and he trusted Josh McDaniels as much as he did, he could miss one offensive play. He might be writing notes down. He might be meeting with the defensive side. He might be going back to the table where the Gatorade buckets are set up so he can lean on something and actually write down some comprehensive notes and then get back to the sideline on second down. And that's I think how it worked for a while with Josh McDaniels here, because he was Josh McDaniels. Now, if you're calling the plays offensively, you'd have to be willing to do the inverse, right? Which is, well, those guys got it on defense. Steven Gerrard got it. And maybe he feels that way, Tom, but those guys are still young coaches and Bill Belichick is still Bill Belichick. I would think you would want his input in all facets, not just solely focused on one side of the ball.
Yeah. And that's probably, honestly, it's the expectation of ownership. They're not going to organize the coaching staff, but I think the Bill would understand, hey, the optics of my job is I have to be overseeing everything. And I can't be play calling and working on design for the next series on a key 3rd and 4 or 4th and goal and person, whatever, everybody listening gets the concept.
Sure.
I do want to move to another conversation that was had relative to JC Jackson that you were kicking over rocks for. And that was the perception among folks you spoke to that said, hey, the Patriots love to play their man defense. And they're not going to have a shutdown corner. Now, I've been covering the team for so long that the notion of playing man strictly was something that has come and gone. The beginning of 2017, after the Patriots acquired Stephon Gilmore, they were a zone team for the first 5 games. They played like ass. Remember Fozzie Whitaker, or whoever the hell it was, with Carolina, naked and alone, running in for touchdowns because they couldn't keep track of people. So the Patriots might be heading, and they eventually switched to man in the Tampa Bay game on a Thursday night, and they were terrific the rest of the year. and defensively. But hey, you might have to play zone. But what that asks you to do is be even better with communication, be even smarter, be even more intuitive, because that's what zone defense is about, is being able to communicate, right, Phil? I mean, even if you've played zone, playing 2-3 on your basketball court, playing pickup, you have to be able, it's hard playing zone, harder in some ways. Yes.
Sure. Yeah. I think it could stress you in a lot of different ways. In man, if the matchups just aren't going to go your way, the matchups aren't going to go your way. And it's damn near impossible to play man. But in zone, you're right. You've got to be on your P's and Q's. And so, maybe I'm like you, Tom. I could see them shifting. I think people just have it in their brains now that the Patriots are man-to-man defense and they'll never change. But it wasn't that long ago where they were playing a lot of zone. This past year, they played a lot of zone because I think they felt like they had to, because the matchups weren't in their favor. Jonathan Jones was gone. Stephon Gilmore was gone. Obviously, they had Jalen Mills and JC Jackson and Devin McCourty and Adrian Phillips. Smart guys, pretty good athletes, smart guys that knew what they were doing out there. And it made sense for them. I think it might make sense for them moving forward to do the same kind of thing. And so, we're all looking at the draft now and saying, well, you got to get that lockdown guy to play man-to-man the way Bill Belichick wants to play it. And yeah, you might have backed yourselves into a corner where you have to try to draft that guy in the first round. Kaiir Elam from Florida, maybe that's your pick at 21 because you want to play that defense. That's who you are. Or maybe you sign some low-level free agent that has got a ton of experience in the NFL, that's seen a lot of football, that can play zone, that knows how to communicate, that's big enough to be able to play in that little silo along the boundary there that JC Jackson has vacated. And you just become a different defense, because if there's one thing Bill Belichick is, I thought Nick Caserio was good on this when we talked to him for Next Pats on that same episode with Charlie Weiss. He said people don't give him enough credit for being adaptable and being able to change on the fly. And I certainly could see that happening, especially if his personnel won't allow him to play this style that everyone thinks he is so married to.
Yeah. And again, it's funny because I didn't really realize until I've been reading the conversation surrounding JC Jackson how married people believe the Patriots are to man. They for a while were not. And Talib allowed them to do it, and Revis allowed them to do it, and Butler to a degree, but Butler wasn't solely a trade. There were weeks that he would, and there were weeks that he wouldn't. There were weeks that Revis did, and there were weeks that he didn't play solely man and check one guy. So,
it's interesting. Sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead, buddy.
I think part of it too is the Bill Belichick tree, right? Brian Flores left and was so much man for the last 3 years in Miami. Matt Patricia, when he went to Detroit, they played a crap ton of man. And it was the Patriots, Lions, and Dolphins for like 3 years, 1, 2, and 3 in whatever order in terms of their man percentage snaps for several years. And so, when that happens, people, I think, the narrative just gets plopped into everyone's brains and it's hard to get out of there. But you're right. I mean, it would not surprise me at all if they go and they sign, Travarius Ward for some kind of low-level corner deal from Kansas City, and they say, hey, we're going to play cover 3 and, and quarters coverage and cover 2 and cover 2 trap and all this stuff that we saw just last year. But, we're going to do more of it because man-to-man is probably not going to be something we're going to be able to handle.
If you're playing zone, Phil, okay, if you're playing man, that means you're confident the pass rush is going to get there. Because you can't have anybody. You can't have Champ Bailey running around back there playing man for more than 3 or 4 seconds. Eventually, the guy's going to uncover. So it's almost an allowance that the defense as a whole is going to be like a squid, like an octopus. It's going to play real good. So it's going to be fascinating to watch. I don't know what my point is on that. You know what? Let's just
just really quickly on that point.
Yeah.
When teams that often play a lot of man often also blitz quite a bit because you have some free defenders out there. We have to get home, but you also have, okay, if we don't have to make sure we have this section of the field covered with 2 guys, because it's one-on-one over here in man-to-man coverage, maybe we've got a free body that we can send as an extra rusher. So, what ended up happening when the Patriots were playing a lot of zone this past season was it was zone on the back end, which requires a fair number of bodies, but they were getting home with 4 because Matt Judon was playing with his hair on fire and Christian Barmore was coming into his own. And so they had the personnel up front that allowed them to play more zone, to devote more bodies into coverage to make sure those zones were handled properly.
Last item for today, and we will, of course, be back with Next Pats. Please follow Phil on Next Pats. It's been excellent in the last couple of weeks, and we will have another edition of that and another pod on Thursday. But last item, conversation item, Robbie Anderson, and it's got a couple different tiers to it. Robbie Anderson, strictly as a player, Patriots expressing interest in him. Greg Bedard first to report. I believe Jeff Howe also said it. And Joe Person from The Athletic confirming as well down in Carolina. Robbie Anderson last year with Sam Darnold and Cam Newton as a quarterback had 53 catches for 519 yards. He's targeted 110 times. That means his catch rate on targets was 48.2%, 9.8 yards per reception. In 2020, the 27-year-old Robbie Anderson had 95 catches on 136 targets with Teddy Bridgewater as his quarterback, 70% catch rate, 3 touchdowns, 11.5 yards per reception. That was by far his most featured season as a receiver. 95 catches, his second highest was 63. And that catch percentage of 68.5 was 10% better than 58.8 in his second year when he was with the New York Jets. Also his highest usage by far. I like Robbie Anderson. And when you look at the comp between Teddy Bridgewater and Mac Jones, accurate, smart quarterback who can deliver the ball on time, I can see why the Patriots would be intrigued by Robbie Anderson. He is not, and that's the interesting one other point I'm going to make, Phil. When you look at Nelson Aguilar, I've talked to people within the team, the Patriots team, and asked about Robbie Anderson. They compared him to Nelson Aguilar. I think most people look at him as being similar to Nelson Aguilar. Anderson has been a 15 yards per reception guy, except the last 2 years. Aguilar is the same. But I kind of feel like Robbie Anderson is just a tick different. Even though they're built similarly, he can work underneath and be a little bit tougher with the ball. Phil.
Well, and to me, Robbie Anderson, I thought was taller. Like,
Yeah, he's 6'3", but I was surprised to see that Aguilar is he
6'2"?
Yeah, but he doesn't play that big. Does he?
Yeah, and 2 inches is, not insignificant. I like Robbie Anderson.
No, he's
too.
6'0". He's 6 feet 198.
Okay. Yeah, so they're
which
different.
Makes sense because I've always studied them. Yeah, go ahead.
Different
Sorry.
body types.
He's more like
I would say Anderson would be an upgrade. I also would understand people sort of balking at the idea of Robbie Anderson joining the Patriots just because the receiver draft class looks so talented that if you're passing up on what might end up being the next great thing, and I know that's the trap we always fall into in draft season, but if you're passing up on the next Deebo Samuel or the next AJ Brown or the next DK Metcalf or whoever it is this year, to get Robbie Anderson, that hurts. But Robbie Anderson, more the sure thing, clearly has more of a track record. And to me, again, this would be an upgrade, and he would be somebody that defenses have to account for, right? That to me has been one of the biggest themes to come out of offseason discussions that I've had with people around the league that have coached against the Patriots, which is teams were not threatened by the Patriots going outside or deep. They were a very easy offense, easy offense. They were top 10 offense in terms of points scored. So they were efficient, but they were a relatively easy offense to defend because you knew they were going to run the ball. You knew they were going to throw short. You knew they're typically, when they're at their best, they're going to be thrown over the middle. They're going to allow their receivers to make yards after the catch. They're easy to plan for. Yes. There was nobody on their offense that said, oh, we got to make sure we get a safety over the top of this guy, which means, oh, too bad. We got to take a safety out of the box now. We got to try to defend Damian Harris with 7 in the box as opposed to 8.
But now Hunter Henry's going to kill us, Yeah, you're right.
Right. It's just they didn't have that guy. And so is Robbie Anderson that guy? He's more that guy than Nelson Aguilar. He's not Jamar Chase. He's not AJ Brown. He's not what I think somebody like Chris Olave might be, because he runs a 4.3 and runs great routes, and you might need help on that guy in the NFL, wherever he lands moving forward. But he's better. And as long as you're improving offensively, I think that's a move that most fans could get behind.
What's a pain in the ass is the finances of it. Nelson Aguilar has a $15 million cap hit. Even if the Patriots were to release him, they'd still have $10 million in dead money. Robbie Anderson is going to be a $10 million cap hit if the Patriots traded for him. And this is even presuming these were exploratory talks. It seems this is even, assuming that the Carolina would want to push away from the table on Robbie Anderson. But I guess it's more of a conversation, not about him, but about their plan at the position. So that'd be a lot of dough. Would you say goodbye to Aguilar? We'd just be spitballing on that. But one last receiver question, again, related back to Indy. The wide receiver, Treylon Burks. You like him. He was good against Alabama during the season, but he ran a 4.55. Something for me makes me think that I don't want a big receiver. I don't want anybody 6'3", 225. Your thoughts, buddy?
People are scarred by the N'Keal Harry experience. I get it. The time was not very good, especially in a year where it just felt like the 40 times were off, and I know they were off live. Like the unofficial times were, if people were watching the combine on NFL Network, the unofficial times they would get in real time. And then they get the official times later and they're off by 0.4 of a second or whatever. Burks did not run as fast as scouts were expecting. They're expecting him to really kind of blaze in that thing. My understanding is, Tom, he played at an even heavier weight than the 225 in season last season. And so he spent a good chunk of his off season shedding weight, not necessarily working on his start in the 40 and working on those track and field types of workouts that you do leading up to the combine to put yourself in the best light. So listen, that could be another concern. So not only do you have a guy who's big and maybe not that fast, but you have a guy who's big, not that fast, and might get bigger after you draft him in a bad way, right? I mean, if this is a guy who's going to blow up to be 240 by September of his rookie year, that's not what you're looking for.
Yeah, you don't need Kelvin Benjamin out there.
So this is the interesting thing, though. He was projected to be by most a top 15 pick, maybe the first receiver off the board in this year's draft class. And after this workout, maybe he does slip to you at 21. And you just have to look at it and say, do we trust the 40 time? Does the 40 time even matter? Because he's such a big guy. It's really once he starts rolling down the field, that's when he kind of hits his top speed, is at 25 yards or whatever. Unlike some of these other guys who might be quicker starters. To me, he's such a physical body, and he is so impressive at the catch point. And there are so many different things you can do with him. He worked in the slot, worked in the backfield, worked outside. Great production in the SEC, something N'Keal Harry did not have. Pac-12 guys, just not the same. It's just not. When you're running away from the Alabama secondary, that's something that not many people can do. And that's something that Treylon Burks did. So I still think it would be a beneficial move for the Patriots to add a player like that. But I get people's reticence when there are other guys out there that are running 4.3s, Tom.
And I guess the hard thing about N'Keal Harry is diagnosing why it hasn't worked. And I think it has less to do with body type and speed and more to do with embracing, as Cam Newton alluded to, the nature of get up in the morning, start breathing football at 5 a.m., breathe it all day, live it all day, grind yourself to a nub at the age of 22, 23, and 24, and embrace it. I don't think that he had that mindset all the time, the way, you have to in the Patriots organization. And as a result, he's stuck out like a sore thumb. And it's not just me, it's the Cam Newton commentary. It's guys who've defended him, who played the position as well. Look, so the upshot of what I'm trying to get at is I don't think that N'Keal Harry necessarily failed here because he was 6'3", 225 and not a blazing fast guy. I just think that his faucet would turn off and on and off and on. And his focus would turn off and on and off and on. And his engagement would as well. Just work like Jacoby Myers. Find a guy 6'3", 225 who can run a 4.5, who's going to work like Jacoby Myers and be a technician.
And I think that listen, technician, I don't know with Treylon Burks, but I like Treylon Burks because everything I've heard about him is that he's He is somebody who likes to work, and he's not
Like
afraid of
AJ
work.
Brown was a worker. I mean, AJ Brown didn't just talk about edge and occasionally bring it. I mean, look at how many times N'Keal Harry, Phil, would deliver a block that was a bone-crushing block but guys had their heads turned, or, he would scrap after the play. It was kind of like for show. And then other times he gets run over by a 5'9" cornerback. That doesn't happen if you're fully engaged all the time.
You want to do some, some really high level scouting projecting here?
Yeah.
Treylon Burks. I have no idea what this means. Doesn't mean he's a hard worker. Doesn't mean he is a high character guy. Doesn't mean he's fearless. But you tell me. All right. Treylon Burks allegedly tracking down hogs, hunting hogs.
I was going to say
south,
alligator wrestler,
killing them with a knife. So bare hands, hog hunting, wrestling to the ground. That allegedly, okay. I didn't talk to him about this, but allegedly that's something that he partakes in. It doesn't seem like a guy who's gonna, get to the NFL and kind of just kick his feet up. I don't know that, but right. I mean, that's kind of like next level aggression. And
I think you might want to
refine that take a little bit.
No, I like the take. No refinement necessary, but might put you at the other end in terms of vetting him. Okay, one last thing that we're going to hit on. The Skull Crusher let us know, John Henry, that there has been an accord reached between Aaron Rodgers and the Green Bay Packers. 4 years, $200 million, $153 million guaranteed. So the domino that is Aaron Rodgers will never fall into Denver or Carolina or New Orleans or anywhere else. IDGAS.
Really? Not at all? I mean, that's a lot of money. 50,
well,
if it's 50 million a year, is that what we're looking at here?
Yeah, but that's what Mahomes is making, or is Mahomes making 40, 10 and 400 million?
I don't think he's quite at the 50 number.
Yeah, he's 40. He's 40 million.
Pat McAfee says 4 years, 200 is not correct, but Pat McAfee has pretty good sources on this story.
As far as I'm concerned, Aaron Rodgers is where Aaron Rodgers is always going to be. So put a cork in it. Have a good time up there, buddy.
All right.
You got more?
Nope. 153 million guaranteed.
Yeah. Skull Crusher broke that.
Oh, sorry.
All right. Hey, what?
Good job, Skull Crusher.
You have a good day?
Crushing it.
Did you like this pod?
I had a great time.
All right. We're 42 minutes deep, according to the Skull Crusher.
Ooh,
So
congratulations. Free wings, right? For everybody?
3 wings. And we'll see you guys at Splitsville later this week for the 42-minute club. We will announce on Twitter what time we're going to be over there. All right. Take care, everybody.